Okay, welcome to part two. So, if you've already seen video one, 2006 was peak for 9/11 truth. There's a couple other things I want to bring up. It was in July of 2004 that the official government report came out, and what didn't take long for the father of the 9/11 truth movement, David Ray Griffin, to write a book critiquing it because it didn't necessarily have falsehoods in it, but there were glaring omissions. Some distortions too, but really it was the omissions that was the main problem with it. Around next year after that, 2005, unbeknownst to me, Penn and Teller's great show, Bullshit, did a whole episode on conspiracies. 9/11 conspiracies were roped into that. But it was really more of a character assassination than addressing the claims. Kind of disappointing. 2006, as you know, as discussed in the previous video, was peak for 9/11 truth. So, of course, Popular Mechanics made a book debunking all the myths, why conspiracies can't stand up to the facts. It was good, actually, to kind of clean them up a bit because, as you know, with the internet, people kind of get carried away. Maybe there's holograms, maybe there's lasers, maybe no plane hit the Pentagon, it was a missile. Like, there was a lot of outlandish stuff that it was good that it was debunked, but it wasn't as debunked as they would have liked. Not long after this was published, David Ray Griffin, again, very prolific writer, scholar, wrote a book called Debunking 9/11 Debunking. So where was I in all this? So let's rewind a little back to 2006 again. I just recently got high-speed internet, just recently started watching videos, and as you saw from the previous slide, 2006 was an explosion of 9/11 truth, which I stumbled into. Now, I wanted to curate this. I didn't want to introduce it to my family with Alex Jones screaming in the microphone. I didn't want to have, loose change with like a creepy background music to accept. It was already, the facts alone were already damning enough, in my opinion. And not only did I want to present the facts, I wanted to present the support behind the facts. So around the time I was 20, I put together this document. There's a lot of slides here, so I'll try to go through it quickly. And we'll see how it holds up now in 2025, considering how old this is. So, and I actually did a presentation on this at my college. I rented a room with a projector and provided beverages and snacks to everyone who would attend. Only about a dozen people attended. So September 11th, understanding what happened. What we were told: 4 planes hijacked by 19 men led by Osama bin Laden. 2 crashed in the World Trade Center, 1 crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed into Pennsylvania. Then Twin Towers later collapsed due to impact damage and fire. Building 7 also collapsed later in the afternoon due to damage from debris and fire. And Flight 93 crashed into Pennsylvania due to a struggle for control between terrorists and passengers. So this official story is supported by a 9/11 Commission report, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency report. There was another NIST report that came out in 2008, which at the time of creating this was not out yet. And this also does exclude the journal of... There's another Journal of Mechanics, and it also excludes Larry Silverstein's collapse analysis report, which actually wasn't public, so it doesn't really count. There's also the Pentabomb documents that came out in 2003, the summary. So there were some other official sources. This also excludes Besant's mathematical collapse theory, crush down, crush up. But, that's... we'll get into that later. This is just, it's almost better to have it a little simplified now for new people getting into it. Soon afterward, very soon, as a response, our government initiated the war on terror, first in Afghanistan and later Iraq. So at the time of building, making this PowerPoint, it was 5 years later. So in New York City, on the 5th anniversary, hundreds of people held signs saying expose the 9/11 cover-up and t-shirts saying investigate 9/11 and distributing free DVDs of the videos that I described in the previous slide, explaining how 9/11 was an inside job. Many claim that pre-planted explosives brought down the Twin Towers. So just as a first reflection, who could honestly believe this? That forces in our government were secretly involved in causing the attacks and intentionally misleading us? The idea is too radical to take seriously, believing that would contradict with everything we hold true about our government, terrorism, and our security. Well, even the media. The degree of complicit cooperation boggles the mind and, strains credibility in terms of who would need to be involved to pull something of that degree off. Like, those are truly fair questions. And, for anybody who needs to stop there, they're not being stupid. It's just sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And sometimes when you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, is true. So many respected officials suspect a U.S. government cover-up and cooperation concerning 9/11 have gone public about it, especially in Europe. However, those in the United States are more credible. That's fair. They include Ray McGovern and David Michael, both former analysts in CIA. I actually never followed up on these, so I don't know what their deal is or what they said exactly. Paul Craig Roberts, who I guess was an assistant secretary of Treasury. I'm not sure why that would lend credibility. Former Marine Corps Infantry Intelligence Officer Robert Steele and former head of Advanced Space Programs and Department of Defense. It would have been good if I included their quotes or exactly what they're supporting would have been helpful. We'll look at the official story carefully and use the following objective facts to challenge it. Encourage everyone to research and verify the following statements and think about what they imply. So, official story, 4 planes were hijacked by 19 men led by Osama bin Laden. What evidence supports this claim? What does the FBI say? Well, the FBI says Rex Toom, the FBI's chief of investigative publicity, meaning a spokesperson, said the reason why 9/11 is not mentioned on Osama bin Laden's most wanted page is because the FBI has no hard evidence connecting bin Laden to 9/11. So this was told to reporter Ed Haas on June 6th, 2006. So that is shocking. There's a little more to it, a little more nuance in terms of, he wasn't included. Like, he was responsible for the SS Cole bombing, for the embassy bombing. 9/11 wasn't listed on his reasons for being most wanted. What they were trying to say was there was soft evidence. There was, phone calls made to people who knew bin Laden, etc., etc. But the fact that we invaded Afghanistan and the Taliban, because the Taliban refused to give up Osama bin Laden, and the Taliban demanded evidence first before they extradited him, and Bush just said, no, cooperate or we'll invade you. It's the fact this exists at all is pretty shocking. But there is more to it. I don't remember what the details are, but quite shocking 5 years later to hear something like this. There was a very bad, poorly translated videotape that purportedly linked him to it. And terrorism in general. Terrorists usually claim responsibility for attacks they've perpetrated. Otherwise, why bother killing people to send a political message? Bin Laden repeatedly denied responsibility for the attacks. Why would he do this if he was truly responsible? It's a fair question. An interview with Osama bin Laden was published in a Pakistani daily newspaper on a few weeks after the attack. He does make these startling comments. If you read the whole document, there is a little more context, but these are all technically true. He said that he wasn't involved. He had no knowledge of it, and there exists a government within a government within the United States, and the United States should try to trace the perpetrators of the attacks within itself. Read the whole document. He does say a lot of other sketchy, weird stuff, I mean, this is pretty on the nose. Robert Mueller, director of the FBI, recent director. He wasn't the director for like the 10 years prior to 9/11, except for like a couple weeks up. I don't know exactly the time frame, but it's this guy, was put in at a convenient time before the attacks. The hijackers left no paper trail. In our investigation, we have not uncovered a single piece of paper, either here in the U.S. or in the treasure trove of information that's turned up in Afghanistan and elsewhere, that mentioned any aspect of the September 11th plot. So, yeah, basically just lack of evidence. But I think this had to do with justifying why they didn't know ahead of time. I could be wrong. So despite this vacuum, not all of the hijackers were identified within 3 days. That is true after the attacks. So where did the FBI come up with this list? So this one's weird. So I'm going to go back to that CIA guy. But where they came up with the list was mainly from this source. Mix-up in Boston prevented Muhammad Atta's luggage, who was the lead hijacker, from connecting with Flight 11, the first plane that crashed, and the plane he hijacked, supposedly. Seized by FBI agents at Boston Logan Airport, investigators said it contained Arab language papers revealing the identity of all 19 hijackers, including the 4 involved in the 4 hijackings, as well as information on their plans, backgrounds, and motives. So what's weird about this is, 1, why is he bringing luggage with information in it? And 2, there was actually reports of other attempted hijackings the same day, so the fact that it only includes information on those 4, it's so weird. I don't have an answer for it. But George Tenet, who I actually now think is more of a suspect in terms of foreknowledge, he even said that the initial clues found by the FBI were deliberately planted to lead them to the 19 hijackers. I mean, come on. He also thinks that a major foreign intelligence service must have been involved in the attack. Duh. Which we now have proven. But at the time, we didn't know. Saudi Arabia. So it's weird that he would say this. So, I mean, this is the problem with just having suspects and not having a full picture, is you have these types of comments, so you don't know what's going on or who's responsible. But no matter what, it needs to be clarified, period. So here's an interesting one about the black boxes, which most people don't know about. Each plane had 2 black boxes. And what's weird, well, most people don't know, they're actually orange so that they could be found. They provide valuable information about terrorist attack if we had them. They're built to survive the force of 3,400 Gs, which is a plane crash equivalent, and a fire of over 1,100 degrees Celsius for over an hour. Like, these things really are indestructible. And the FBI states that the devices were never recovered from Ground Zero. But contrary to the story, these 2 firefighters by name were at the recovery site as volunteers, and they saw them recovered, and the FBI confiscated them. There were a total of 4 black boxes, which makes sense. 2 airplanes at the World Trade Center. We found 3. Okay, so maybe 1 got missing. The FBI agents left with the boxes. That's their report. Maybe it was FBI, maybe somebody else. I don't know. I'm just presenting that this was supported, and it kind of makes sense, especially considering the fact that the passports survived the crash. Here's a weird one. An FAA manager, for reasons unknown, destroyed tapes containing the accounts of communications with hijacked planes. Witnesses said that he crushed the tape with his hands, cutting into small pieces, and deposited pieces into multiple trash cans around the building. So, further look into this, we actually have the recordings of the FAA communications. So what he destroyed were accounts of the communications, which were collected after the fact. And he did this on his own, actually, despite his manager. This wasn't a top-down thing. I initially thought that this had something to do with the cover-up, but it turns out I think what he was trying to avoid was having his employees get legally incriminated because they were talking without a lawyer about something they might be liable for. And so I think the reason why he did that was that any evidence, self-incriminating evidence of his employees would be inadmissible. You could look into it for yourself, but that's what I've, since making this, have come to understand regarding this point. Motive. Here we go. Did any terrorist benefit from the 9/11 attacks? What was their motive? According to President Bush, America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world. As a result, terrorists became the primary target for the U.S. military. Now, is this really a benefit to the terrorists or their objectives? Who actually benefited? Larry Silverstein, Project for a New American Century, Bush administration, Mary Giuliani, the Pentagon, weapons industries, military generals, unknown investors, and warned officials. There's more. But yeah, all these are still true. Larry Silverstein, private developer, signed a 99-year lease with the Port Authority for the Twin Towers weeks before the attack. His insurance payout policy included a payout of $7 billion if there were 2 terrorist attacks, which would more than have covered the cost of the whole complex. So Port Authority built and managed it for over 30 years, and Silverstein was the first private owner. I guess somebody else won the contract before Silverstein, but 2 days before his contract was due for signing, he insisted on a shorter lease of 39 years, which cost him the bid. The contract was given to the second runner-up, Silverstein, for a smaller amount, $3.22. He was able to lower the down payment from $800 million to $616 and raise the annual rent payment. Actually, a lot of that I learned after, too, is his money down was even less than that. He had a lot of other people help him with that down payment. But that's typical business. I'm not sure what his deal was or how he was involved, if at all. This could have just been a coincidence. It's circumstantial. Exactly 1 year before 9/11, Project for a New American Century advocated the buildup of the U.S. military, but thought that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. This is in page 51 in their document, Rebuilding America's Defenses, released a year before the attacks. This whole document is just, fantasizing about America taking over the world, but in framing it like it was a good thing, which the authors really did believe. Get rid of all the communists, get rid of all the socialists, America, utopia, get rid of all these, horrible Middle East dictators, secure all of our energy resources. We got to do this. The Cold War's over. And so now we don't have this other world power, as competition. And I think they were all itching to make something like this happen. But, having the people and Congress not support preemptive empire building was a huge hurdle for them. So no matter what, no matter who attacked us on 9/11, it was politically convenient for everyone involved in this, and so many people in the Bush administration were involved in this project for a New American Century. Members included Vice President Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Jeb Bush, and others, a lot of others, but really Dick and Don are, the 2 primary guys here. After the attacks, of course, the approval rating soared, despite the common held belief the attack took place due to failure to protect us. It's a legit question. Does failure do one's job merit approval? I think a lot of people believed him when he said that it was just so unprecedented, and he was just, he really had a positive persona going on in terms of being the face of American leadership. So Dick Cheney could do everything in the background. Giuliani, really his main crime was allowing the rapid and illegal destruction of the crime scene evidence. So a lot of people say, no, it was a rescue effort. We had to get all the debris out of the way to get the people underneath. Well, that's not the problem. The problem is we shipped it under market value to China to get melted down, 80% of it. And we also got rid of the debris pile under World Trade Center 7 first, which didn't have any victims in it. So it still doesn't make sense. Who knows what he knew? He tried so hard to run for president using 9/11 to do this. He was there so he could do his photo op walking through the chaos in a suit to make himself look good. He also was told that there will be collapses, which they were unprecedented structural disasters, regardless of the cause. So the fact that anyone would predict that, no firefighters were predicting that, and they're all experts in steel frame, high-rise damage and fire. So it's just bizarre. There are some theories that we can go down. The city's hasty move to destroy evidence has outraged many of the victims' families who believe the steel should have been examined more thoroughly. 80% of the steel is scrapped without being examined. There's no one under Building 7's wreckage to rescue. Yep. No one to this day was punished for breaking the law by disturbing crime scene, needlessly destroying or recycling almost all the evidence. And part of that is because it was treated as an act of war instead of a crime, which is like a legal distinction. And it would have been a crime had the Pentagon not been struck. But because the Pentagon was struck, that's what legally moved it into act of war. So Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld stated from the Pentagon the day before that according to some estimates, we can't track $2.3 trillion in transactions. He promised change, but the next day the world changed, and in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the issue was forgotten. And most of those killed were civilian accountants called Rescue Services Washington, or bookkeepers and budget analysts. They're at their desks when American Airlines struck. So I have some links here to that. Another point of note is that Donald Rumsfeld was on the opposite side of the Pentagon, directly the opposite. Also, it looks like I didn't include here that it was Wedge 1 that was struck, which was recently fortified to sustain missile impacts or plane impacts. Obviously, the weapons industry. I mean, I don't even have to go into this. There was a lot more than what I have here. It ended up being almost $7 trillion. Yeah, here's a good one. On March 4th, 2001, the Fox TV show The Lone Gunman, which was a spin-off of X-Files, and Lone Gunman referring to the Warren Commission's theory on JFK, aired an episode called Pilot, where the U.S. government electronically hijacked a plane and attempted to crash into the World Trade Center and blame it on terrorists to increase military spending. You cannot make this up. Go watch the episode for yourself. I have a little quote here from it. There you go, blaming the entire government, in fact a small faction, but for what possible gain? Cold War is over, with no clear enemy to stockpile, arms markets flat, bring down a fully loaded 727 in the middle of New York City, and you'll find a dozen tin pot dictators all over the world just clamoring to take responsibility and begging to be smart bombed. Yeah, so couldn't have been that crazy if it was in the public consciousness enough to make a whole TV show about almost the exact same thing. Standard protocol for interception of an airliner that has lost contact is around 20 minutes. Planes were intercepted 67 times in the year before 9/11, according to a NORAD spokesperson. On 9/11, all of our generals failed to follow standard protocol, resulting in the attacks. Instead of being punished, they were rewarded with budget increases and promotions and medals. I should have a picture of that here. If 9/11 was a failure, why were those responsible never punished for it? Yeah, you'd think somebody would lose their job. That's their only job. Yeah, unknown investors on September 6th, put volume on United Airlines was more than 4 times its average daily for that year. Put volume on Boeing totaled more than 5 times its average. Citigroup experienced extraordinarily high put volumes. At least $5 million was being made betting on the losses of these stocks. No put options on any surge on any other airline. Money uncollected raises suspicions that investors whose identities and nationalities had not been made public had advanced knowledge of the strikes. Actually, this one's actually even worse than what I have here. They figured out who they were, and when they did the investigation, they're like, oh, they're not members of Al-Qaeda, so that doesn't count as foreknowledge. They were Bush-related. Mort Walker III. Yeah. So warned officials. There were lots more than this. I just have this one as an example. And there was no clear pattern to it. It was really just sporadic. Pentagon officials canceled travel plans because of random security concerns. San Francisco mayor received a warning not to fly 8 hours before the attack by an unknown caller. Well, yeah. A request for formal investigation was met with resistance by the Bush administration until 9/11 victims threatened lawsuits. Investigation finally began 441 days after the attack, with a total budget of around $16 million. Compare this with combined investigations into Clinton, which cost a total of $800 million, for Lewinsky. Also, following most other tragedies, such as those of Pearl Harbor, JFK, and space shuttle disasters, investigations started within a week, 7 to 9 days. Despite this effort, according to the 9/11 Commission report, the question concerning those who financed the worst terrorist attack in history is of little practical significance. Page 172. Yes, that's all still true. The official story, one plane crashed into the Pentagon, supported by eyewitness testimony and crash scene evidence. However, there are rumors that it was hit by something other than Flight 11. All right, let's go into these rumors. These rumors focus on an apparent lack of damage to the Pentagon, its lawn, and lack of airplane debris. As you can see by this illustration here, it is very counterintuitive because the plane is basically flush with the ground, and post-damage, it barely, the hole is tiny. It doesn't look like an airplane can fit in it. The rumors also focus on the fact that within minutes after impact, the FBI arrived at nearby gas stations and a hotel to confiscate the video footage of the plane. Also, all footage ever publicly released to this day shows no evidence of an approaching plane, just the impact explosion. Yeah, there's a very poor quality video that was released in 2006 of the plane impact, which really all you can make out is an explosion. It's like 5 frames a second in fisheye lens. But this is suspicious. But there were a lot of eyewitnesses that saw it. And there was plane debris. And there was the flight data following the flight. Good. I did bring up wedge 1 here. Was only one of 5 wedges with the newly reinforced concrete steel walls and bomb-resistant windows. Because of the renovation work, only 20% of employees were even stationed there. Of those, none were high-level security. None of those were high-level officials. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was safe in his office up opposite of the building, as stated earlier. Hani Hanjour, the lead hijacker of Flight 11, his flight instructor said he could not fly at all, and this is referring to a Cessna 1 engine. Yet he pulled off a 330-degree, 7,000-foot dive into the Pentagon at 460 miles per hour without missing. As you can follow the line here, the flight path, NTSB flight path image. What does that prove anything? No. Is it make you raise some eyebrows? Absolutely. Is this merit more investigation into how this was even possible? Yes. Not only that, NORAD was for the first time in U.S. history commanded by someone other than a military general, and that was Dick Cheney. Big surprise. Norman Mineta, Transportation Secretary, was interviewed on C-SPAN and recalled Dick Cheney being aware that Flight 77 was heading towards the Pentagon some 30 miles away. As it approached closer and closer, a young man asked Cheney if the order still stands. The order. We don't know the order. And Cheney replied, "Of course it still stands. Have you heard anything to the contrary?" This was according to Norman Mineta's testimony. And there's a little more to that. They were following it. It was 40 miles out, 30 miles out, 20 miles out, and that was Cheney's response, per his memory. Dick Cheney's a member of the Project for a New American Century, PNAC, the one that needed New Pearl Harbor to push their agenda. Fair. War games, Operation Vigilant Warrior and Vigilant Guardian are being conducted that morning to simulate hijacking situations. The National Reconnaissance Office of the CIA was running a drill of a plane into building emergency that morning. The drills did confuse our defenses during attacks, as recording from NORAD prove. Another thing is the generals were trying to spin this and say, oh, we're actually more prepared because we had people stationed exactly for this scenario. Except, I guess the timelines that they were trying to submit to the commission or to Congress didn't add up, didn't make any sense, and they were never punished for giving false testimony under oath regarding the timelines. And yeah, it did contribute to confusion. Foreknowledge. Bush and Condoleezza Rice testify that no one in our government envisioned flying planes into buildings. Nobody in our government, and I don't think the prior government, meaning Clinton, envisioned flying planes into buildings on such a massive scale. Yeah, but this is just flat out not true. There were this NORAD had drills area like September 11th among imagined targets. I think that's referring to the attacks that day, but there were lots of continuity of government scenarios of planes being flown like into the Pentagon. There's pictures I should have included of like the model plane and the model Pentagon. Like they've totally envisioned this. Means, motive, and opportunity. So who had the means, motive, and opportunity? Who lied? Who benefited? Who illegally destroyed evidence? Who resisted an investigation? Who were rewarded for failing to protect us? And where does the hard evidence, not circumstantial, hard evidence actually point to? Well, this Project Northwoods really is just a level set on what is possible for people in our government to even contemplate. This is really for those people that are like, no way anybody in our government could even think of doing something like this, to kind of turn down the volume on the naivete. So this was a declassified federal document containing plans to implement deadly terrorist attacks on U.S. citizens, some involving fake hijacked planes. In this case, it was to blame it on Cuba in order to gain public support for military invasion. Luckily, they didn't implement this. It was proposed and signed by all the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this was like a unanimous plan by every person of authority in the Pentagon. So for 40 years prior to 9/11, an FAA rule allowed commercial airlines pilots to carry firearms in the cockpit. It was adopted in the wake of the 1961 Cuban Missile Crisis as a measure to prevent hijackings. 2 months before 9/11, the FAA rescinded the rule. Interesting, right? Another interesting fact, 15 of the 19 hijackers obtained their U.S. travel visas in Saudi Arabia. Visa Express was introduced there 4 months before the attacks. And Saudi Arabia is the only country in the world that enjoys such privileges when it comes to visas. And of the 15, at least 13 of the 15 that were Saudi Arabian, at least 13 hijackers were never interviewed by the U.S. consular officials before being granted visas to enter the United States, and none of them have filled the documents properly. They just were able to skirt in no problem. Now, common sense is safe to say that an authentic record of history does not contain scientifically provable contradictions. If it does, an alternative must be investigated. Now, are any of these statements outright impossible? Twin Towers later collapsed in the fire. to the ground solely due to impact damage in the following fire. Building 7 also collapsed later that afternoon solely due to debris damage and fire. Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania due to a struggle for control between terrorists and passengers. First, let's look at Building 7. Building 7, a 47-story steel high-rise, collapsed later that afternoon for debris damage and fire. Is there evidence that contradicts this? So what I'm going to list here is dynamic characteristics. It collapsed into dust, essentially, at nearly free fall speed. I should clarify, through free fall acceleration for the first 2.5 seconds into its own footprint, and it collapsed symmetrically with a sudden onset. And it is true, there's no other steel high-rise in history that's ever completely collapsed due to damage and fire before or since, except Building 7 and the two towers. Like, that is a fact. It is an extraordinary circumstance, so people can say, well, that planes never flew into buildings like that, and towers didn't collapse right next to Building 7 like that. So, there's some wiggle room here. This is a GIF that doesn't really play unless I make it full screen, I believe. Here we go. That's Building 7, which I can't believe, people still don't even know. The only known symmetrical collapse was a sudden onset into dust and nearly free fall speed in their own footprint. What a mouthful, right? Are controlled demolitions except for Building 7 and the two towers. Compare this controlled demolition, Building 7. So you could see, they're side by side. They're the exact same thing. There's not even a lot to try to convince anybody here. It looks the same. Unique characteristic controlled demolitions, a kink to ensure the building doesn't damage surrounding buildings. Now, here are some structures that collapsed without explosives. So, it decelerated. It wasn't total. It wasn't rapid. Buildings are, especially steel frame, they can fall due to gravity, and there's a lot of damage that can be inflicted. Does it just disappear into a tiny pile of dust? Can this happen? Can it pulverize, or is it probable? Without slowing down is the thing that makes it impossible. What could produce the molten metal fountain? So this molten metal point is a point of contention. Either there was no molten metal because fire doesn't melt steel and it just needs to weaken it, or if there is molten metal, well, it came from some other source. Maybe the pile acted like a furnace or something. A lot of stretching here. What could model the collapse? So this just shows you the debris damage. Most of the core columns are intact. And this was years before NIST's official explanation, which they attribute it not to damage, just to fire, which is even harder to accept. Molten metal was found. NASA pictures indicate thermal hotspots under 7, 1, and 2, over 1200 degrees C. Fire reaches 800 degrees C max, which is not hot enough to melt steel. So, notice also that this building here, you have to go over this building to World Trade Center 7. And what this picture doesn't show are the other buildings right next to 7 that didn't even collapse at all. There we go. This is actually a really good picture. How did the adjacent buildings remain standing undamaged? How's the entire building reduced to a rubble pile only 3 stories high? So some eyewitness accounts here. Emergency worker, first year NYU medical student. We heard a sound like a clap of thunder, and we were shocked to see the building was a shock wave going through the building. All the windows busted out, and a second later, the bottom floor caved out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building collapse down all the way to the ground. That wasn't included in official analysis. So 9/11 Commission report didn't even mention that it existed. And of course, NIST has postponed its official explanation at this time of me creating this in 2006. FEMA concluded the best explanation for the accidental collapse of Building 7 has a low probability of occurrence. No duh. So Stephen Jones tried talking about it on MSNBC, but they refused to air the footage as he explained the demolition hypothesis. And then months later, after permission from the president of MSNBC, they aired the collapse footage, but with a different guest. How convenient. It was empty hours before its collapse. By 11:30, fire commander in charge of that area ordered firefighters away from it for safety reasons. Larry Silverstein regretfully made a statement concerning Building 7 in the PBS documentary America Rebuilds. He said, I think the smartest thing to do is pull it, and they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse. So, fair question. What did Silverstein mean by pull it? So later on in that documentary, you hear a demolition expert saying, we're getting ready to pull Building 6 just before they demolish it. I don't know if the documentary is not available or not. Later, he said, I meant pull the contingent firefighters out of the area, even though firefighters left the building abandoned anyways because they couldn't get water to it, so the fire was left unfought. So why is Building 7 even an issue? Nobody even knows about it. CIA, Secret Service, also SEC, IRS, lots of sketchy stuff in there. Still strange, though. Why not just destroy the evidence without destroying the whole building? Seems like overkill. If we can prove that 7 was a controlled demolition, it sort of makes it harder to dismiss the idea of the Twin Towers also being brought down. If it's just the towers, you can say, what are the odds? Somebody would rig it ahead of time. But the fact that World Trade Center 7 was apparently demolished that day of, and I made this before there was evidence of news footage saying that it collapsed before it did, reporting it as if it already had happened. But that's for another video. This is already going to be a long video anyways. Twin Towers later collapsed to the ground due to impact damage and fire. So is there any evidence that contradicts this? So despite some videos to the contrary, I think Saban, who is an engineer, made a video saying, 80% of the cores were damaged. Not true. You could say that there was moderate damage on some, heavy damage on some, and severed on just like a tiny handful here on both. Most of the columns, and including all the exterior columns, besides the area where it came in, they were intact. This is from NIST. So, what they were designed to withstand was an accidental 707 crash. You see for yourself the size comparison here between a 707 and the airplanes that hit. And this also includes the speed, the ratings for which they were anticipating when designing the towers, because they're huge towers. So how about let's just put all that aside. Let's just assume, for the benefit of the official story, the plane's collisions just obliterated those impact zones for South Tower floors 77 through 85, and for the North Tower 93 through 99. So the rate of collapse is a serious issue that has not been dealt with or explained. Bazant tried. I didn't include that in here. Both towers collapsed due to dust and shredded steel in about 12 to 15 seconds. And this is true at free fall in a vacuum from the height of the towers. In a vacuum, meaning no air resistance, an object would take about 10 seconds to reach the ground. So, this is fast. And that's a lot of destruction in a very short time. The towers themselves were 70% air and 30% solid mass. All that office space. And given that light density and 1 acre surface area, if you took just a 15-story section falling through the air at free fall, it would take about 12 seconds because the air resistance would hit that bottom surface at about 2.4 seconds. I wish I had the calculations to justify this, but I mean, intuitively, sounds right, but it really should include more to justify that. On September 11th, we watched both of the entire buildings explode into dust in 12 to 15 seconds. How is it even possible? What is the explanation for this event that seems to contradict the law of physics? So what we have here, the momentum of the 12 to 28 stories, towers 1 and 2 respectively, falling onto the supporting structure below so greatly exceeded the strength capacity of the structure below that the structure below was unable to stop or even slow the falling mass, which was also being destroyed into rubble. The top portion, I mean. So it's not a solid piece crushing like a pile driver. As it's hitting it, it's blowing up. The downward momentum felt by each successive lower floor was even larger due to the increasing mass. This is, I think, quoting Bazant. Their assertion that it was unable to slow the mass requires us to believe that massive steel frames of the towers provided no more resistance to the falling rubble than air. Yeah, and not only that, the steel used for every floor was thicker and thicker as it went down, as is normal for high structure buildings or high story steel frame buildings. So the lightest and thinnest steel was at the top. What's also good point is, I mean, and it's even worse than this actually. This is just an initial collapse. Debris fell a lot farther out. Majority of the rubble fell outside the tower's footprints and hence could not contribute to the crushing. The floors above collapsed to an explosion of dust and steel beams shooting hundreds of feet in every direction. So at this point, what continued to crush the entire intact structure all the way to the ground? No one's answered it. NIST released advanced 3D computer-generated images of the plane impacts, but refused to release a 3D model of the collapse itself. Yeah, it's so complicated. It sure is a lot more complicated to 3D model the plane impact versus the tower collapse. There is no visualization for them to release because it doesn't work. So, is it radical to assume that somehow explosives were used in aiding the complete destruction? Maybe not explosive, incendiaries, something to remove the resistance below. So here we have the zoom up of those awful squibs, demolition squibs, apparent demolition squibs. As somebody with an open mind, like maybe this was like air trapped or something, but the fact that like they're the same every level down and it matched the other video and no official version makes sense. It's weird and it bothers me. What do New York firefighters and police survivors who were there have to say about this idea? So I have a lot of quotes here. Firefighter saying there are definitely bombs in the buildings. Former CIA director said, "That's crazy." Former CIA director said, "Buildings don't just implode like that. This was a demolition." Wow, I don't even remember that. He was the fire department's anti-terrorism consultant. Oh, he didn't say that. He sent the gag order down. Oh, I was always wondering who did it. Of course, it was the CIA that sent the gag order to stop people from talking about it. I don't know who had this quote, "Buildings don't just implode like that. This was a demolition." I don't know who said that. Probably Paul Isaac Jr. So as I'm reading this, because it's been a while, Paul Isaac Jr. is convinced there are bombs and he's not supposed to talk about it, according to former CIA director. Once a spook, always a spook. And there's this whole story about William Rodriguez, who had experienced explosions before any of the planes were hit. They didn't include his testimony. Feel free to go down that rabbit hole if you like. Evidence of explosives from firefighters. This guy, you could read it for yourself. He thinks there was actually devices that were planted in the building. You know, I mean, a lot of people want to dismiss these as well. You know, there's confusion and there was damage, and things that are on fire could sound like explosions, like if, you know, AC system blows up or whatever. So, you know, it's not the hard evidence, but these were excluded from the official analysis. I mean, if we're going to speculate here, they would explain the unique characteristics of the dynamics of the collapse progression. Symmetrical, sudden onset, nearly free fall speed, complete pulverization of hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete in less than 15 seconds, the molten metal, the 1,000 people unaccounted for. And at this stage, there's no clear tie between molten metal and demolition devices. Why would there be molten metal? The molten metal at this stage is still just an anomaly. And right here we have this guy, Scott Forbes, who is famous for talking about a 36-hour power down. I think he's the only one that mentioned it, though, so I don't know how strong this testimony is or how it's corroborated. And, of course, the power down wasn't included. But he's not just nobody. He's a senior database administrator. Maybe he meant power down for their data center. I'm not sure. He saw a lot of strangers. And also 36 hours wouldn't be enough to rig the whole building. So I don't know what the hell's going on with this. Over the past few weeks, evacuated a number of times. They think they had an inkling something was going to happen. Security detail been working 12-hour shifts because of numerous phone threats, but on Thursday, bomb-sniffing dogs were abruptly removed. I mean, there had to have been... I mean, that's so short before the attacks. I don't know how... I mean, that's... I have a name here of somebody who said that, so I don't know what that can really mean, though. Security systems at Dulles and World Trade Center are owned by a cousin of President Bush, Marvin. Stratasec. Look it up. Barry McDaniel. John O'Neill's story. He was a top anti-terrorism expert. He resigned from the FBI, stating he was ordered not to investigate Saudi al-Qaeda connections. Found a new job as head of security for the World Trade Center. I don't know if his first day was September 10th. I've heard that. It could have been like a week before. But I have multiple sources here on that that you can follow up on. So this was just another awkward quote from the president. He said that he told us that operatives have been instructed to ensure the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping. This is just Bush gobbledygook. What the heck does that even mean? Put the explosives high enough so that people above won't escape. Like, this doesn't... And the fact that he said these words, like, it was a plane impact. Operatives are instructed to ensure... So this actually, if he... What's funny is, okay, if it was an inside job, right? The lower you put the explosives, the more people will be killed. If you're doing this as a psyop, not necessarily to kill as many people as you can, but just to, make it obvious that we're being attacked. So for the TV, the higher you put the explosives, the more people can escape. So it's just really weird. Flight 93, there's evidence that it might have been shot down. I don't really see why this is important other than it's just another lie. Of course, Donald Rumsfeld accidentally said that it was shot down. Eyewitnesses saw explosions before the crash, and crash debris was spread 6 to 8 miles. So debris, including what appeared to be human remains, was found miles from the crash site as well. So this is more of one of those things where the official story is, the passenger said, "Let's roll," and we have people who heard it on the plane phones testimony of this happening. So it's just anomalous. I mean, even I saw F-16 fighters that were saying, we were psychologically preparing ourselves to shoot down a passenger jet because, if we need to, we need to, and then we never had to. So just another open-ended question, because, this evidence seems to indicate it was. Well, there was no problem with admitting that. Cheney said once the attack was done, he authorized the shoot down. It's tragic, but it wouldn't have been unacceptable to admit that. So I don't know why we would lie about that. Here are the timelines not adding up. And actually, it's much worse than this. The timeline discrepancy was far more than 3 minutes, closer to about 10 minutes, which for an airline emergency and tracking is insane. I would need to follow up with that. Okay. This is a very long video. Thank you for listening. There's a whole bunch more that I added. This was really more for my sake at the time, trying to add things up. But yeah, at the time, 20-year-old me, freshly 20, sophomore in college, in the year of 9/11 truth, I put this together. Most of it stands up pretty good, and sadly, there's even more. So thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.